When the Sega Saturn showed up in late 1994, there were a ton of questions about how the technology would perform. Believe it or not, even its two-dimensional performance was a mystery then, mainly because we didn't have very much to go on. Astal didn't show up until nearly 6 months after the Saturn released in Japan, and Layer Section was coming up on a year itself. It really wasn't until X-Men Children of the Atom showed up in November, a full year after the Saturn launched, that people felt confident to truly say the Saturn was indeed a two-dimensional powerhouse. That began a string of releases that made the platform an instant hit with fans that loved Capcom Fighters and various other action games that would land on the platform. Release after release, the Saturn proved it could handle just about anything the arcade could throw at it. And when Acclaim announced that a port of Mortal Kombat II was in the works for the Saturn, expectations were understandably high. Despite 16-bit platforms having done a fantastic job overall, none of them were arcade perfect. The sprites were smaller, the sound effects and music weren't quite as strong, and of course not all the animation was there. The Saturn made promises to rectify that with early ads claiming supercharged graphics and animation, CD-quality music, and electrifying sound effects. Acclaim continued promoting its supposed arcade quality right on the back of the retail packaging. There was no question about it, the hype being built up meant this was going to be nothing short of a pixel-perfect representation of everyone's favorite murder simulator. Or so we thought. In this episode, we take a look at Mortal Kombat 2 for the Sega Saturn, a distinctly acclaimed product, if there ever was one. Mortal Kombat 2's gameplay was always an outlier when it came to a Capcom guy like me. It used a 5-button setup that made you use one of them as a block, leaving you with 2 punch and 2 kick of the high and low varieties. It wasn't just the interface that was different either, because the AI was night and day as well. It was designed primarily as a reactionary loop that countered you every time you made a move. So much so that on the higher difficulty settings, it could be quite ruthless, with an almost Terminator-like aggression that ran you down and conquered you with ease. To combat this, you needed to learn what the AI was weakest towards, and how to catch it with certain patterns that allowed you to exploit it. One of the most famous is what I call the jump back technique. This is where you would jump away from an overly aggressive AI, causing it to jump after you. This often left it open so you could go on the offensive and get in some major damage. There were even a few loops where the AI would constantly try the same special move to knock you out of the air, allowing you to exploit it heavily. There are a number of others, but you get the point. You almost had to take advantage of these strategies because the AI was so effective otherwise. It ruled the air with an iron fist. It blocked your projectiles religiously. And if you got near it anywhere on the ground, I guarantee you got tossed every damn time. But the appeal of those early Mortal Kombat releases was never its deep gameplay or mechanics, but rather the unbridled brutality. You played for the blood-soaked moves and ultimately the right to finish your opponent with one of your gory fatalities. This almost always involved some body part being ripped off, exploding, or being burnt to a crisp. Each fighter had 2 or more, and there were even a few stages that had specific ways of murdering your adversary. Rounding out the content here were hidden characters you could battle, often tied to some secret that must be performed in order for them to show up. You also got 2 unplayable boss fighters who were much larger and more imposing than the standard combatants.
Round 3, fight! Get over! Get over! Finish her. Scorpion wins. Fatality.
The one area where it was clear the Saturn was gonna absolutely crush its 16-bit brethren were the visuals. And man, is Mortal Kombat 2 on the Saturn a vastly superior representation of the arcade. The massive sprites are very close, and the colors are pretty much perfect. Side by side, you are hard pressed to tell which is which. Even the animation is close enough to the point where you almost have to count the frames to find any real discrepancies. When taking just the visual assets into consideration, the Saturn version is a triumph that nails the look and feel of the arcade in pretty much every aspect. To combat the usual problems of Shang Tsung morphing on CD-based hardware, the Saturn gives you the option of only allowing him to morph into the person he's fighting, which eliminates any issues with interrupting the gameplay. The other option is to leave on the capability to morph into anyone, which means constant interruptions, which pretty much ruin the flow of the battles. This was a constant issue with early CD-ROM based console ports, and it remains so here. But there were other issues as well, and not all was right with this one. While the visuals themselves were accurate, the performance was hamstrung by little micro pauses and stutters as the game seemed to load data for animations and sound, especially during the fatalities. It would also do this during the matches themselves, and it made the game feel janky and unfinished. But honestly, all that was the least of this game's issues.
Fight. Get over here! Finish him. Fatality.
Being on a CD, the music was pretty much guaranteed to be arcade perfect, yet somehow the developers managed to mess this up as well. The stuff here feels weak, has less impact, and just doesn't have the same energy as the arcade. The same can be said for the piss poor sound effects. It's almost as if they were remixed to a lower quality so it wouldn't tax the memory as much. I don't know who was in charge or why, but the stuff used in the Saturn version is point blank laughable in comparison to the original arcade. Worse, there are many sounds and voices just straight up missing. The announcer will omit names that the characters select, and often at the end of the match, you'll get nothing at all. Whether due to budgetary, time, or skill constraints, the sound effects disappoint on a profound level. Aurally, this is not the same game as the arcade, and it makes a huge impact on its quality. Let's have a listen to a few comparisons so you can see how truly awful this was.
Finish him. Scorpion wins. Fatality. Finish him. Fatality. Scorpion. Round one, fight. Come here. Fight.
And the frustrating changes just kept on coming. The developer of this title, Probe Entertainment, decided they were going to change the AI routines. That basically meant that those little quirks that allowed you to have a fighting chance in the arcade were changed here, leaving you basically at the mercy of a relentless computer opponent that had few weaknesses. Worse, there was no real discipline in the fix, meaning the developers didn't take the time to balance anything. So some fighters are left with moves the AI counters incessantly, while others can be spammed to hell and back. On the highest setting, it devolves into a sweep fest because that's mainly what the AI has the biggest issue with. It's true that a veteran that knows the ins and outs of the game can still cope, but good luck to all you casual players hoping to have any success at all. This game will run you down like a dog, pick you up, and do it again until you are looking at a continue screen constantly. Not even the arcade on its highest difficulty compares to how this game is coded to annihilate you. Needless to say, very easy is what most people will keep it set to. But let's say you adjust to the new AI and you don't have any issues with it. Does that mean this game is an awesome port? Not in the slightest. The micro pauses when the data loads, the completely broken sound effects, and the fact Shang Tsung is essentially nerfed to hell means this version of Mortal Kombat 2 actually ranks well behind the conversions on the Super Nintendo and 32X. The big problem here is that the Saturn version was based on the PC CD-ROM release, which meant the developers weren't porting the arcade, they were porting a computer version that had none of the memory or storage issues that constrain the Saturn. This was unacceptable because not only was the arcade version 2.5 years old at this point, but other companies like Capcom, Sega, Data East, and Santa Claus had already had success porting two-dimensional arcade fighters to the Saturn, none of which had any of these issues. This was as dirty of a port as Acclaim had ever been responsible for. Saturn owners deserved better, and so did this classic arcade game.
Fatality.
It's almost inconceivable that Acclaim botched this port on such a profound level. I mean, they had published both NBA Jam Tournament Edition and WWF WrestleMania the arcade game on the Saturn, two releases that were fantastic ports of their coin-op cousins. But here it was clear the job was either too much or the company was ill-prepared to properly support it. What we got here was a game with relentless AI that was more difficult, but also much more broken in terms of balance. Gameplay riddled with stutters, and sound effects that were either wholly missing or changed into vastly superior representations of the original. That leaves us with one of the Saturn's most disappointing 2D fighters that honestly should have been an easy slam dunk. Initially, this was supposed to be a compilation that included the original Mortal Kombat, but that was scrapped for this standalone release for unknown reasons. That didn't stop Acclaim from charging full price for this substandard work, however. If you wanted Mortal Kombat 2 on the Saturn in 1996, it was $50. Acclaim even had the gall to port this broken Saturn version to the PlayStation in Japan, which wasn't all that great itself. In truth, no game back then was truly arcade perfect. These were conversions, not emulations, so it was fair to expect little changes here and there. But these weren't little changes. The differences in the AI and the data slowdowns mean it didn't play the same. The missing and re-recorded sound effects meant it didn't sound the same either. And that was just not what the majority of arcade fans wanted in a home version of Mortal Kombat 2. To add salt to the wound, it was a vanilla adaptation lacking any real original content. There's not even a dedicated versus mode with built-in stage select options. You have to do that through the options menu every single time. After getting this one for every 8 and 16-bit platform you could think of initially, one would have thought bringing it to the 32-bit generation would have at least meant something new could have been added. If Acclaim was going to half-ass the technical side of things in this one, a few extras could have made a world of difference. As it stands though, Mortal Kombat 2 on the Saturn is at best a piss-poor port that is nowhere near the quality of the coin-op original. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.